We have a lot of attendees this afternoon, so we'll give everyone just a few more minutes to join in on the call before we get started. Okay, we'll get started right now. Welcome to today's webinar, COVID-19 Financial Assistance, Accounting for Disaster Relief Loan Programs. For those of you joining us for the first time, Pursuit is a community-focused lender that offers alternative financing and SBA loan programs to small businesses in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Our mission is to provide businesses with affordable loans and resources so they can reach higher, transform, and grow. My name is Malini Krishna, and I am the Assistant Vice President in the Business Advisory Services Group here at Pursuit. Our group specializes in consulting services and training programs for Pursuit's community finance borrowers. I mention that because if you are a Pursuit client, we encourage you to reach out to your Pursuit loan officer or representative to get connected to technical assistance and other resources to support your business, whether that's guidance on strategic planning, new financing options, or support in business operations. We not only have these public resources like this webinar or our public website, but we also have access to specialized service providers and thought leaders to help you navigate the current economic environment. One such person is who I'm joined with today, which is Jim Lozano, partner at BST & Company CPAs. Jim manages a division which provides outsourced CFO and high-level financial management services for businesses and nonprofits to ensure that their financials are up to date and clearly explained to make better informed decisions. Jim has worked with several of our Pursuit borrowers to have accurate financial reporting and tax advice, which makes him an ideal partner for today's webinar. So thank you for joining us, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get started, I want to say we received hundreds of questions on today's topic, and we did our best to categorize them in topic groups, but that's to say that we did not cover every single question you might have had, especially if it was specific to your business or industry, which means that we won't be able to address everything today, but the idea is that we wanted to give you general information that would be applicable to most borrowers. That being said, we also do have a chat feature in GoToWebinar. It is likely that we might run out of time, so we may not be able to answer those questions as well. If you do have further questions after this webinar, we encourage you to submit them via the Pursuit website to us. We will do our best to provide more information and address any questions as new information and guidance is available. So our goal today is to answer questions on procedures, documentation, and things to look out for around PPP, EIDL, and other relief programs that most of our borrowers participated in this year. The idea is that you will be prepared for reporting and tax purposes. And if you have any specific questions around this, we really encourage you to get a CPA this year. I know many of the borrowers we've talked to, this might be the first time they've received external financing or have a much more complicated balance sheet. So we encourage you to engage with a CPA like Jim to talk through specific conditions or considerations for your business. Also on a general note, this information is as current as of today, which is December 15th, 2020. We both realize that Congress is currently considering legislation for additional stimulus and COVID relief measures. We are not going to speculate what that bill includes or what that final law will look like, but rather talk about what we know is present today in law and in writing as we speak. If we get more information in the future, we will be updating this webinar and our website, so we encourage you to check back regularly. So the goal of today's agenda is 4 parts. 1, we will talk about PPP forgiveness guidelines and what we know. 2, we will cover the accounting basics for PPP and EIDL, cover any tax implications or documentation you need for tax purposes, and generally review the process. So let's first start with PPP. First and foremost, if you did not get PPP from Pursuit, we please encourage you to reach out to your lender. We at Pursuit do not have broad access to loan information if we did not administer your PPP loan, and each individual lender has individual procedures on the forgiveness process. If you did receive a PPP loan from Pursuit, you should have already received email communications from us. As it stands, we are sending out invitations for PPP forgiveness based on the month your loan was funded. If you have not received any email communication for us, please reach out to us via your loan officer or our form on the website so we ensure that we have the right contact information for you. But in general, the things you will need to apply for forgiveness is what we got from the SBA website. There are also links on the Pursuit website for this. First, you need to download the appropriate forms, which is a 3508. There's 3 versions of this form, and I'll briefly talk about the 3. The first is 3508S. It's for borrowers who took out PPP loans for less than $50,000. The next one is the 3508EZ. Those are for borrowers who did not reduce employee levels, wages, or hours this year. And if you did not fall into one of those 2 categories, you need to use the general 3508 forms. Is there any other information you think that borrowers should have when preparing for their PPP forgiveness, Jim, in general, besides just the forms?
I think we'll talk a little bit more in detail, but they should have their payroll records for whatever their covered period was, whether they chose to use 8 weeks or 24 weeks. Copies of any checks for rent, utilities, and their mortgage interest. For rent, you also are likely going to need to upload a copy of your lease agreement as well. And then for utilities, you'll also likely need a copy of the actual invoice that you paid for, because all of those things need to be within the covered period. And then last but not least, most banks are requiring you to submit your bank statement as well to prove not only payroll was paid, as well as to show these canceled checks as well.
Wonderful. And this is just to remind everyone, there is a lot of documentation required for this. So we highly suggest, even before their final legislation, at least start collecting your documentation. That will probably be the easiest thing to help you facilitate. Also, just a special note, we got a lot of questions on if there's going to be automatic forgiveness for less than $150,000. The answer is we don't know yet. It is not in law. So, you know, if we have more information, we will let you know, but it's not official yet. That being said, there are forms available, so take that as with what that means, which is collect your data and your forms so you have that ready to go.
Let me just say one thing on that for both the 350S and the 3508EZ. The forgiveness, the automatic forgiveness is really just a quicker response. You will still need that documentation. You will still need to submit that and retain that. Keep those records yourself, but it is just a faster process for forgiveness. Currently at the $50,000 level, but potentially all the way up to $150,000.
Great, thank you. Also, Jim, if you just don't mind reminding us, we did get a couple of questions. What is the relationship between the EIDL grant and the PPP forgiveness you can ask for? You could just make that clear. A number of people asked that question as well.
So if you did receive dollars, if you applied for an EIDL loan, and they were offering and gave upfront money that was a grant to you prior to you being approved for an EIDL loan. The amount of that changed throughout the course of the pandemic. but any amount that you received as a grant from the EIDL will be a direct deduction on your forgiveness. So the example I'll use is $50,000, let's say. So if you received $3,000 in an EIDL grant,
Mhm.
the maximum amount of forgiveness that you will have on your PPP loan would be $47,000, because that EIDL loan truly is money that you do not have to pay back. And so that is the rule that they have put in place, that it would be a direct deduction from your forgiveness.
Great, thank you for the clarification. And one last note before we go into the nitty-gritties of the accounting details. As I mentioned, there is talk of new legislation. Again, we don't know what that is. Brianna, if you just might go into the next slide. There might be additional PPP borrowing that has been proposed. That is, again, not set in stone. However, if there is another round of PPP funds allocated, Pursuit will be accepting applications, and that URL link is there. It's also on our website, and I'll make sure that we review that at the end. So just know that we will continue to be a resource on PPP, both from the funding side as well as the information side. So let's dive into it. Accounting for PPP and EIDL. You briefly touched on this already. What is the difference between the grant and the loan for EIDL?
It's exactly what I said. The grant is something that does not need to be repaid. And theoretically, the PPP loan needs to be repaid in one way, shape, or form. It's either going to be forgiven, or if it's not forgiven, then you will have to repay on a schedule that's set by your bank.
And you should have very clear documentation to know which is which, correct?
That's correct. I mean, there's very little documentation for that EIDL grant that you got. It was, the beginning of an application, and then most people saw that money appear in their bank account.
Great. So let's start with the basics. How do I account for both of those PPP and EIDL funds on my income statement and my balance sheet?
So the grant in the case of what we're talking about, the EIDL, would be income to your company, and that would be it. You'd receive it into your bank account and book it as revenue on your income statement. And then the PPP loan currently would stand on your balance sheet as a liability that is due to be repaid. And again, either way, repayment's either going to come in the form of forgiveness, or it's going to come in the form of a loan that has terms associated with it. If the loan is forgiven, it would then become income on your income statement. And if it is forgiven, currently, it is not taxable income to you. So normally, if a loan is forgiven, it would become taxable income to you. But the government has said is it will not be taxable income.
That's an important distinction. So just so we're clear, I know a number of people have asked, if you are applying for additional financing from a number of borrowers, they do want to see PPP loans on your balance sheet so they have a sense of what kind of funding you got. And is there any considerations we should be thinking about, since it's likely that the forgiven money will not that forgiveness will not happen in 2020, it'll happen in 2021? Is there any sort of considerations that need to change as a result from an accounting perspective?
There are a couple. There is one tax consideration. I'll just remind people, or let people know, you have 10 months from the end of your cover period that you're allowed to apply for forgiveness. So it is in most cases that 10 months is going to cross over years. The current consideration about whether to apply now or later is the issue of the deductibility of the expenses related to the loan you received. As the rules stand today, any money, any expenses that were used or that were paid for by the PPP loan, the IRS has said they will not be deductible on your 2020 tax returns. That's as the rules stand today. There are discussions about that changing, but as the rules stand today. And so I will just go back to the first thing you have on this slide. It is extremely important that you are talking to a CPA or a financial advisor about what that means for you as a company if you are not allowed to deduct those expenses. Very, very important, because it could lead to a tax liability for you. And so that it is super important in every situation. I can't give you general guidance on this because every business is going to be different. It's why it's important that you have a trusted advisor that has experience with this, that you can talk to about, what you should do and the timing of when you should potentially apply for forgiveness. I'll give you one example that came up today.
Great.
We have a customer that has a September 30th year end, and their tax return is due in January. So they're going to wait to apply for forgiveness until this next stimulus bill. There's an outcome on this next stimulus bill in terms of whether it passes, because it could change how that tax return gets filed.
That's really important, I think, and a very key point here at the top here. Let's actually transition, because there were some really functional questions about PPP. So what constitutes the actual payroll portion that you can deduct or report?
Gross payroll.
Okay, so
Yep.
that's
not net, gross payroll.
That's important. And what kind of documentation is sufficient to show that payroll?
Yep, so we talked a little bit about that before. So in terms of payroll, if you're using a third-party payroll provider, ADP, Paychex, GTM, there's a number of them out there. Most, I know the big two, Paychex and ADP, both have reports that you can run specifically for the covered periods that will give you the gross payroll that you've spent during your covered period. So you're going to need those payroll reports to show that what you spent, and then you're also going to need to prove that along with that, you're going to need to prove that with your bank statement that money was actually paid out. So that's for payroll specifically.
This question came up a number of times. So are there penalties for non-approved uses? And the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes. And it's very explicit in the early instructions that they can be severe.
If you have any questions, again, this is a great time to engage a CPA. If you had anything that came up mid-year, again, please contact someone, especially if you are concerned about uses of money. Are there any special considerations for sole proprietors? And this actually goes into the second question. People with partnerships where they don't have traditional payroll, it's much more about distributions as their form of salary.
Yep. So I'll start with the partnerships. So the partnerships, it was determined early on, they changed the rules on that. You can use the distributions as payroll expenses. They are still limited. In the case of a partnership, still limited to the maximum of $100,000 annually,
Mhm.
but you can use them. We have that situation here with our firm, obviously, and we are using those distributions as payroll. As for the sole proprietors would use Form 3508EZ, and in how much they could ask for, they were limited to their 2019 Schedule C net income, and they're limited to 2.5 months of that. So on the Schedule C, they would need to divide by 12 and then multiply by 2.5 for how much loan they could get. It's the same on forgiveness. They're also limited to that amount and still are not allowed to exceed the $100,000 annually. So the maximum a sole proprietor could ask for the 24-week period is $20,383, I believe is the exact number.
Okay, that's a hard
But
one.
they only, the EZ form is the one that they would use because they don't have any FTEs, and there's a box to check that they're sole proprietor. They check that box, they can use that form.
Great. So we'll make sure you know that there's the 3 forms, and if you are a sole proprietor, use the EZ form. Are there any considerations for nonprofit organizations?
There are not really. The special considerations came in terms of in the early part of funding, in terms of what types of not-for-profit could apply for it. So there were some types of not-for-profit that were excluded, but there are nothing special in forgiveness that they have to adhere to.
Okay. So let's switch over to SBA loans. As we know, the CARES Act did cover SBA 6 months of payments of SBA loans this year. Again, we don't know if there's going to be additional coverage for that, but there were the 6 months this year. If you did receive that, how do you account for that?
Melania and I discussed this yesterday. It will be income to your company. You will receive, the SBA has said they will be issuing to those companies what's called a 1099 miscellaneous to them. And so the way you would record it on your books is you would record the payment as income, and then you would then also record that as reducing your principal and booking your interest as an expense, as you normally would, as if you paid it. So it will be income to you that to a degree you'll have to pay tax on, but you will get a 1099 miscellaneous, which will require you to book it as income.
Okay, that's an important thing to just sort of look out for the 1099 miscellaneous. I will say, Pursuit borrowers, please reach out to your representatives. We can get you some information on that as well, or if you have any troubles receiving that form. All right, other tax considerations we should be thinking about. You've already covered this, I think, in a number of things. Is PPP considered taxable income as of right now?
No, it's not as of right now, but again, it's really important for everybody to talk to their CPA or their trusted advisor. If the rules do not change as it relates to the deductibility of expenses, you could be faced with a tax liability that you would need to pay.
So that is on point 2 here. Just keep that in mind right now. So with the current laws, that those business expenses are taxable, and that's important to consider it as you are moving into tax season. And the carry piece, I think that was a really good example that you gave with your client earlier. This is sometimes tax issues can be a timing issue, it sounds like. So
correct.
If you didn't use that, this is also sort of important. We talked about this earlier this week, Jim. if you didn't use all of your funds that you were allocated, is there anything that you should be considering or talking to your CPA about? So if you've got some money in savings.
Yeah, I think it would be hard for that to actually in reality happen. I think potentially what somebody's talking about there is, they have that money separated in a separate bank account. But if you consider the 24-week period that you have to spend, only 2.5 months of payroll that you received, it's nearly impossible that you will have any real funds left over. I understand what somebody's asking there because they may have segregated funds, but the reality is when you go to report that, you will have spent most likely more than 2.5 months. So I'm not sure that this question, really is going to happen. Do you follow me? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important on the PPP side. I know for folks that use EIDL, it was the spirit of the loan or the grant was to be used in 2020. So I'll just sort of say that as with a little bit of peace, if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
No, I mean, it was only the maximum it could have been was $10,000.
So, okay.
So I would imagine somebody has spent $10,000.
All right, so these were the general areas that we received a lot of questions on. I know that there are a lot more people are more worried about timings and timing considerations. That, of course, is individual to the business. Again, we would ask you to reach out to us in Pursuit. We will give you both our websites for Jim's company and Pursuit to reach out to us. I will say, there were a fair number of people that said they did not receive sufficient funding from PPP or EIDL. Pursuit is actively lending across all of our 15 loan programs, whether that's our SBA programs such as 504 loans, 7A, Community Advantage, and Microloans, and our traditional loan projects such as the Smart Loan products, as well as financing for state and government contracts. So we really encourage you to reach out. If there are any changes in PPP, we will be putting that up on our website. All of that, if you are interested in any of those loan programs, we encourage you to either email us at info@pursuitlending.com or pursuitlending.com/apply. We'll let you do the pre-application for our loan products. So I know we're coming up on our half an hour, so I just thought we'd do a quick review. Next slide, please. So here are the key takeaways. There are currently no firm guidelines on the forgiveness of PPP. However, you should be prepared for that with the following documentation. That's bank statements, payroll reports, and/or canceled checks, and the completed form of the 3508, whether that's the regular, EZ, or S. That's all available on the SBA's website, sba.gov. Please contact your PPP lender for guidance and when to apply for forgiveness. And please, please, please consult a CPA this year for preparing your taxes. We are noticing increasing number of questions. Jim, can you give some guidance on, when should you engage a CPA? What should you look for if you're just a one-person shop versus a 10-employee shop?
Yeah, so I think each business, really needs to find a firm that fits their size, and it has to be somebody that, you talk to ahead of time and that you trust to get the work done. I would talk to other business owners that and get recommendations from other business owners. But not every firm is right for every business. And I think, if you're a small business, you should likely be with a smaller accounting firm. The larger your business, the larger the accounting firm, which will have much more experience specifically on the tax side of things, will have many more partners who have experienced many different things to help you get through it. If you pick a firm that's too big for you, sometimes you can get lost within the scheme of things. So I think the best way to go about it is talk to other business owners that you're acquainted with, find out who they're using, and if nothing else, do a phone interview to talk to the firm and make sure that you know they are speaking a language that you understand.
Great. And I will also just add, you know, we can be a tremendous resource. There's a lot of folks at Pursuit that have lots of conversations with CPAs, which is how Jim and I got on this conversation almost 2 months ago. We will continue to be leaning on his expertise as the months go forward. So please continue to look at our website, pursuitlending.com. If you're interested in the services that Jim's firm provides, their website is listed here too, bstco.com. I know that there are going to be a lot more questions as legislation changes. Please keep in touch with us. We want to be a resource for you. And I know that this might be the first time that some of you are addressing some of these issues on your balance sheet. So we encourage you to continue to have this conversation with your lender and really engage a CPA this year. I want to thank everyone who submitted questions and for your patience. We really appreciate your participation. And Jim, thank you so much for your expertise. It's been really helpful to work with you and get sort of very key, succinct answers for our borrowers. It is not as complicated as I thought it was going to be, and we appreciate your time today.
Well, Melanie, thank you again for having me, and we're happy to help out. You know, I always say that we're in the business of helping people. We just happen to do it through accounting.
And as one of our partners says, you know, the reason we really like to put an emphasis on financial education is if you don't know the numbers of your business, then it's just a hobby. So thank you for that guidance. Thank you for everyone listening in. If you have any other questions, please be in touch. Otherwise, thank you and have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.